All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. The Final Truth, Understand Her Nature, written by Conrad Reicher. Available now, links in description. The trivium of the gauntlet: how to survive the shit test, reject the carbon cult, and dismantle the Marxist pedagogy of lies. You have been mugged by reality while looking at your phone, scrolling through a feed of lies designed to geld you before you even reach the starting line of your own life. That brisk run she invited you on? That was never exercise. It is a visceral biological interrogation of your genetic worthiness, a shit test refined by millions of years of evolution to see if your sperm is worth the egg. Yet too many men are out of breath while the Zoomer Beta wheezes his way into evolutionary irrelevance. We are living in a Babylon of woke where the very air you breathe is taxed as carbon guilt by a neo-pagan death cult. And the classroom has become a re-education camp where Paulo Freire's ghost whispers that your very nature is an oppressive sin. But I am here to hand you the red pill of logic and the canon of truth, to show you that when she pretends to struggle with a jar, she isn't being cute. She is weaponizing incompetence to extort your competence. And you must learn to see the matrix for what it is. The system is rigged against the masculine imperative to build, protect, and sustain, replacing the trivium with emotional grievance and the Schopenhauerian will to life with a sniveling apology for existing. Look at the data, the suicide rate of divorced fathers, the absurdity of family court rulings that treat men as wallets with legs, and the cuckoldry rate that biological studies confirm but sociologists hide. These are not accidents. They are the calculated results of critical pedagogy and a long march through the institutions that replaced Aristotle with resentment. We must weaponize the truth, using the syllogism of survival to prove that nature demands the fittest survive, and that the green lobby uses apocalyptic imagery to bypass your logic and trigger your fear. Just like a narcissistic partner, it ends now. We will dissect the public defense protocol to understand why standing up for her is the ultimate test of your status, and we will expose the carbon footprint social shaming for the economic enslavement it truly is. I will teach you the stoic response to feigned helplessness, ensuring your competence is a gift given voluntarily, not a tribute extorted through emotional blackmail. We are going to redeem the living spirit of Western civilization, brick by brick, fact by fact, and logical proof by logical proof, so you can finally navigate the gauntlet with your eyes open and your head high. Prepare to have the scales ripped from your eyes. Hyperagency and the biological gauntlet. I watched it unfold from the sidewalk cafe, a tableau of modern misery and ancient triumph played out in grimy high definition. A drunkard, reeking of cheap spirits and bad decisions, swung a wild haymaker at a woman who had made the error of walking past him without proper deference. 2 men stood nearby. One, a specimen of the modern soy construct, face buried in his phone, likely scrolling through a feed of social justice platitudes, physically recoiled. He was the product of a society that tells men their strength is a sin. But the other man, a figure of imposing stillness, radiating the quiet confidence of a man who has lifted iron and stared down the void, did not hesitate. He didn't scream or lecture. He simply intercepted the violence, directing the aggressor into the pavement with the efficiency of a machine executing code. The drunkard fled, and the woman did not run to the trembling phone scroller. She turned her wide, dilated eyes toward the man who had exercised force with precision. In that moment, she didn't care about the theories of the patriarchy or the sociology of aggression. She cared about survival. The street brawl revealed the truth that the leftists have tried to scrub from history. Protection is not toxic aggression, it is divine servitude. We must use the sword of grammar to cut through the tangled ropes of feminist linguistics. They frame masculine strength as a threat to be mitigated, a pathology to be cured by therapy and state intervention. This is a logical fallacy of the highest order, an inversion of the natural order. We must redefine the terms. When a man places his body between the chaos of the world and the life of his kin, that is not the imposition of hierarchy. It is the ultimate act of service. It is divine servitude. The leftist narrative seeks to shame the protector into becoming a passive observer, rendering him impotent to shield the very civilization that allows him to exist. By rejecting their framing and reclaiming the definition of protection as a sacred duty, we strip the cultural Marxists of their power to manipulate the innate male drive to safeguard. Consider the undeniable logic of the syllogism of survival, a chain of reasoning that shatters the fantasy of egalitarianism. Premise A: nature is a harsh, indifferent machine that demands the fittest survive to propagate the species. Premise B: women, as the biological bottleneck of reproduction, are the selectors of the fittest. They are the gatekeepers through whom the genetic future must pass. Conclusion: therefore the tests, the shit tests, the manipulation, the unreasonable demands a woman employs are not mere personality flaws or the result of a patriarchal society. They are necessary evils, evolutionary mechanisms forged in the fires of millennia to ensure the preservation of the species. She must test you because the cost of choosing a weak mate is death for her lineage. Consider the failure of the modern Zoomer Beta, a prime example of contemporary heroism's collapse. Brought up in a cushioned society that shuns risk and praises compliance, he misses the natural drive to face hazards. I observe this often. The classic guardian gives way to a passive man who fails defensive tests because of manufactured fear. Facing a threat, whether a burglar or a social predator, he stands frozen. He learned that violence is inherently bad, police will manage it, and he must calm things down. Yet a predator does not calm things down, a predator devours the prey. This contemporary man suffers from a plot to weaken male resolve, leaving his dependents exposed, and his culture open to any savage strong enough to force entry. This biological interrogation takes many forms, one of the most misunderstood being the evolutionary shit test of physical stamina. I recall a specific instance involving a man named Marcus and his date, Sarah. They went jogging, a simple activity, yet it became a visceral trial. Sarah pushed the pace, mocking his breathlessness, testing his resolve. This was not merely a fitness assessment, it was a biological interrogation of his genetic worthiness. In our ancestral past, a man who could not keep up during a pursuit was a liability. He was the hunter who returned empty-handed, the defender who fled the battle. Her body was asking a primitive question. Does this man have the lungs to chase down the food and the legs to carry our offspring to safety? When Marcus finally rallied and overtook her, matching her pace with a steely gaze, her biology instantly recognized him as a viable mate. It is not about the jog, it is about the persistence. The physiology of dominance is undeniable, rooted in the cold, hard data of evolutionary biology. We cannot deny the markers of high value: testosterone, the hormone of risk and resilience; cortisol regulation, the ability to remain calm under pressure; a low resting heart rate, the engine of the efficient predator. These are not toxic traits. They are the biological hallmarks of a man capable of physically protecting and providing. Evolutionary psychology confirms that the jog or the sudden crisis is a proxy for hunting efficiency. A man who collapses under emotional stress or physical exhaustion is signaling to her that his genetic material is inferior, that he would crumble in the harsh environments where our ancestors forged the contract of survival. We must also dissect the public defense protocol, a dynamic often ignored by the cowards of the academy. When a man refuses to defend his woman in public, whether from a physical threat or a social insult, he fails the ultimate litmus test of his protective instinct. History, from the Stoic streets of Rome to the unruly saloons of the Wild West, illustrates that a man's willingness to face social peril for his woman is the ultimate marker of his status within the tribe. If a man allows his woman to be disrespected by a stranger and apologizes to keep the peace, he is effectively castrating himself in her eyes. He is signaling that he is a subordinate, incapable of securing the perimeter. The woman knows this instinctively. She desires the man who will burn the world down to save her, not the one who offers a half-hearted shrug. Arthur Schopenhauer, the great philosopher of the pessimistic tradition, understood this through the lens of the will to life. He recognized that the female nature demands these stress tests because she is the vessel of the future. She needs a partner with the vitality to secure the survival of offspring in a hostile, indifferent universe. The cruelty of her testing, the way she pushes you to the brink, is the compassion of the species for its own survival. She is ruthless because she must be. She acts as an agent of nature's will, filtering out the weak and selecting the strong. Do not hate her for it. Understand it. She is the gauntlet, and you must be the hammer that strikes the iron until it is fit for the throne of history. Nature screams for the lion, yet the modern male roars like a gelded sheep, a pathetic failure, not of biology, but of programming. This impotence does not happen by accident. It is a manufactured lobotomy designed to sever the young man's spine before he ever enters the jungle. The battlefield has shifted from the wild to the classroom, where the enemies of truth do not fight with fists but with feelings, seeking to replace your survival instinct with a doctrine of guilt and submission. Subversion of the soul, the critical pedagogy of the oppressor. Walk into any modern university lecture hall today, and you are walking not into a sanctuary of wisdom, but a re-education camp designed to surgically remove the spine of the young men sitting inside. I have seen the syllabi with my own eyes, documents that would make the Soviet secret police blush with envy. One mandatory introduction to sociology text at a prestigious state college explicitly defines straight white men, not as individuals, but as a structural monolith of oppression whose very existence is an act of violence. This is not education. It is a ritual of shame, a circular logic trap where the student is guilty before he even speaks, simply for possessing the biological sin of testosterone and melanin deficiency. They teach the young man that his nature is a crime, that his ancestors were villains, and that his only redemption lies in prostrating himself before the altar of collective grievance. This is the subversion of the soul, a systematic demolition of the masculine spirit, using the absurd dialectics of cultural Marxism to turn a potential lion into a compliant house cat, terrified of his own roar. This madness did not sprout from the soil of the West organically. It was imported, a cold and calculated weaponization of the classroom perfected by Paulo Freire, a radical whose pedagogy of the oppressed is nothing more than a manual for parricide. Freire understood that to conquer civilization, you do not need to march tanks down Main Street. You only need to turn the students against their fathers. By framing the transmission of knowledge not as a gift from the elder to the younger, but as an act of tyranny by the oppressor onto the oppressed, he weaponized the natural youthful rebellion of the teenager and directed it squarely at the foundation of the family and the state. This is the long march through the institutions in full swing, transforming the academy from a place of seeking truth into a laboratory for engineering resentment, where the critical in critical theory simply means being critical of everything that built the desk you are sitting on. The result is a pathology of the victim that spreads like a mind virus, hijacking the evolutionary biology of the human brain to serve a parasitic ideological host. We are wired to protect the vulnerable, a trait that allowed our ancestors to survive the ice ages. But these ideologies have hacked that instinct to protect the perceived victim at the expense of the capable. This creates a metaphysical handicap in men, a spiritual impotence where the male is told his competence is unfairness and his strength is aggression. By embracing the mantle of the oppressed, the leftist acquires a moral license to commit the most heinous cruelties. justifying the destruction of male livelihoods and the skyrocketing male suicide rate, which sits at a staggering 3 to 4 times that of women, as social justice. It is a survival strategy for the wicked, a way to weaponize pity to extract resources from men they despise. To facilitate this theft, the architects of this decline have launched a brutal assault on the trivium, that ancient triad of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, which once armored men against deception. They gutted grammar so words no longer have fixed meaning. Look at how they butcher the definition of woman or racism to fit their immediate power grabs. They dismantled logic so that feelings trump facts, allowing them to claim equity is the same as equality when they are diametrically opposites. Equality is the right to pursue the race. Equity is the demand that the fastest runner wait for the slowest, and if he refuses, he is dragged down by the state. History screams the truth of this. Every society that chased forced equity over meritocracy, from the Khmer Rouge to the famine-stricken wastelands of collectivist farming, ended in starvation and collapse. They hide this data, burying the undeniable fact that when you suppress the high-performing male to elevate the incompetent, the whole structure crumbles. We are witnessing the endgame of a war that began in the lecture halls, but it can only end in the restoration of the canon. The only inoculation against this brainwashing is a return to the great books, to the testosterone-fueled wisdom of Plato, Aristotle, and Aquinas. These men did not cower in safe spaces. They wrestled with the absolutes of the universe. They defined the good, the true, and the beautiful, concepts that the modern leftist hates because they are immutable and judgmental. To reclaim your soul, you must stop reading the grievance-mongering drivel of the modern day and pick up the heavy books that built the greatest cultures in the known universe. You must relearn the trivium, sharpen your mind until it is a blade that can slice through the thick, suffocating fog of feminist and Marxist lies. The truth is not a comfortable blanket. It is a sword, and it is past time you picked it up. This shrieking fool on the street corner is merely the disposable pawn of a massive economic heist, a mindless servant serving the interests of a globalist priesthood that demands a feudal tithe in exchange for existing. Her hysterical performance is not just a display of ignorance. It is the psychological ground preparation for the implementation of carbon taxes and ESG scores. The twin levers of a financial machine designed to strip the productive male of his resources. We must look past the screaming woman to see the cold logic of the parasite class, which weaponizes guilt to seize the very means of production that keeps civilization breathing. Parasitism of the spirit, the carbon guilt complex. I stood on a corner in Austin, Texas, watching a spectacle that perfectly encapsulates the absurdity of our age. A woman draped in synthetic fibers and holding a paper cup filled with imported coffee was screaming at a construction worker in a heavy-duty pickup truck. She called him a murderer for driving a machine that runs on diesel, completely oblivious to the reality that the very existence of her latte, her smartphone, her synthetic clothing, and her vegan lunch relies entirely on the logistics networks powered by the trucks she despises. This is the eco-tyrant in her natural habitat, a creature who feeds on the fruits of masculine industrial labor, while simultaneously biting the hand that feeds her, demanding we return to a pre-industrial fantasy that she lacks the grit to survive. She is a parasite of the spirit, projecting her own dependency onto the men who built the civilization she takes for granted. To understand this madness, we must apply the trivium and look past the emotional manipulation to the stark reality of logic. Let us construct a simple, undeniable syllogism. Premise A. Human life and flourishing require abundant, affordable energy. Premise B. Carbon-based fuels have historically provided the most reliable, scalable energy, lifting billions out of poverty and extending life expectancies. Therefore, conclusion C. The war on carbon is not a war on pollution. It is a war on human life and a specific hatred for the poor who rely on cheap energy to survive. This is the axiomatic truth that the leftists hide behind their walls of jargon and tears. By attacking the energy source that powers the West, they are essentially advocating for a culling of the weak and a return to the Dark Ages, all while claiming the moral high ground. This logic brings us to the financial mechanisms of this control scheme. Carbon taxes and ESG scores are nothing more than modern feudal tithes designed to strip productive men of their resources and transfer them to a new globalist priest class. You work in the mine, the factory, or the fields, sweating and straining to produce value. And these bureaucratic lords levy a tax on the very air you exhale to fund their own decadence and anti-Western projects. It is a shakedown, a protection racket, where the protection is from a boogeyman of their own creation. They use the money stripped from your paycheck to fund their conferences in Geneva while you struggle to fill your tank, proving that the goal is not environmental purity but economic enslavement of the productive class. How do they get away with it? Through a masterful application of psychological abuse. The Green Lobby utilizes apocalyptic imagery, floods, fires, hurricanes, to bypass your prefrontal cortex and trigger your amygdala, the fear center of the brain. This is the exact same tactic employed by a narcissistic partner. Isolate you, terrify you, and then present yourself as the only savior. They show you a graphic of a polar bear on a melting ice cap to make you feel guilty for existing, hoping you will surrender your freedoms and your critical thinking skills in exchange for a fleeting sense of safety. It is emotional blackmail on a global scale, designed to keep the male population in a state of perpetual anxiety and submission. If we look at the data rather than the propaganda, the narrative collapses. The real science shows us that renewable energy, while useful in specific niches, currently lacks the energy density and reliability of fossil fuels. The sun does not always shine, and the wind does not always blow, but the hospital needs power 24/7. And the steel mill needs heat to melt the iron that builds our bridges. To reject oil and gas is to reject the West's ability to heat homes in the winter and feed the billions who rely on the agriculture fertilized by petroleum products. The push for green energy without a viable baseload replacement is not an environmental policy. It is a suicide pact mandated by people who have never worked a day in the real world. We must recognize the carbon footprint social shaming for what it truly is, a neo-pagan religious ritual designed to induce a state of perpetual repentance. They have taken the Christian concept of original sin and secularized it into the sin of existing, thriving, and building civilization. You are told that your mere presence is a pollutant, that your breathing is a crime against Gaia, and that you must atone by reducing your standard of living. This guilt complex is a spiritual weapon intended to break your will and convince you that your natural drive to build, conquer, and expand is an evil that must be purged. It is a psychological cage forged by the enemies of human potential. Ultimately, the root of this environmentalism is a deep-seated misanthropy and a Malthusian death cult. These people do not want to save the planet. They hate human flourishing. They look at the smog-choked factories of the 19th century and see only the filth, ignoring the fact that those factories produced the sanitation and medicine that allowed their ancestors to survive childhood. The carbon footprint is a thinly veiled attack on masculine industrialism and the raw, powerful energy required to build an empire. They want you dead, or at the very least, they want you domesticated, docile, and sterile, grazing in the electric pastures they have prepared for you. It is time to reclaim the moral high ground and reject this narrative of decline. To subdue the earth is the ultimate expression of the good and the true. It is the divine mandate of man to take the raw materials of nature and sculpt them into something greater than their original state. We are not guests in this world. We are its masters and its stewards, and our mastery is demonstrated by our ability to harness the power of the atom and the depths of the earth. Do not apologize for your truck, your heat, or your hunger. Dominate nature, build your empire, and laugh in the face of the nihilists who demand you apologize for the crime of being a man. This ideological sickness does not merely manifest in the grand lies of global climate treaties. It has seeped into the very foundation of our daily economic interactions, rotting the floorboards of the corporate workplace. Just as the eco-fanatic utilizes the apocalyptic narrative to extract feudal tithes from the productive class, the modern office matriarch employs the theater of feigned incompetence to extract labor from the competent man. It is the same parasitic instinct, merely shifting its target from the macroeconomy to the micro-interaction, a localized replication of the Marxist demand that the strong subsidize the weak. We must now turn our logical lens from the globalist scam of carbon footprints to the interpersonal scam of the damsel, exposing the biological deceit at the heart of the office dynamic. Sovereignty in the face of feigned helplessness. The blinking cursor on her screen mocked her, or so the performance suggested, as she let out a theatrical, frustrated sigh that was calculated to carry exactly 3 cubicles over. I watched from my position of logical superiority, recognizing the rhythm instantly. It was the rhythmic groaning of the professional damsel, a siren song of incompetence designed to lure a capable man into the rocks of domestic labor within the workplace. This is the pretending to struggle with something he's good at dynamic, a biological shit test dressed in office casual attire. She wasn't confused by the spreadsheet. She was bored by the effort required to master it. She knew that I, a man driven by the transcendental value of competence, would feel the primal itch to fix the error, to impose order upon chaos. By feigning helplessness, she was engaging in a manipulation of competence, attempting to lower my status to that of a servant while elevating her own to that of a beleaguered queen, merely to avoid the honest labor of thinking. It is a wicked evolutionary tactic where the female appears helpless to maximize resource extraction, in this case, my time and intellect, while minimizing her own caloric expenditure. It is the trap of false equality, where we pretend her struggle is genuine, but the lie is naked to anyone with eyes. I recall a specific instance, a case study of the corporate fix-it, that illustrates the gynocentric parasitism infecting our modern institutions. A marketing manager, a woman whose degree was essentially a certification in grievance studies, couldn't get the pivot table to work. She leaned in, baton of the eyelashes deployed, voice pitched just right to trigger the protector instinct. I walked over, bypassed her nervous hand, and in 10 seconds, literally 10 seconds, I corrected the formula. The data bloomed into the truth she needed. Her response? She turned to the vice president, a man so castrated by HR policies he couldn't look at a woman without a consent form, and announced we finally got the table to work after a real group effort. I was ghosted from the narrative. This is the theft of competence, the robbery of the masculine surplus utility that builds civilizations. This is not a partnership, it is a tax on ability. A man trained in the trivium sees the logical fallacy immediately. It is an argumentum ad passionis, an appeal to emotion. Her premise is that her frustration justifies my labor. The conclusion is that I should abandon my work to serve hers. This logic is rotten. The major term is her emotion. The minor term is my capability. And the syllogism is a non sequitur of entitlement. We must identify the deception and refuse to play the game. The leftist ideology that has infested the corporate world tells us that refusing to save her from her own self-inflicted incompetence is toxic masculinity. Rubbish. It is the enforcement of boundaries. The pathologies of Marxism demand that the capable be enslaved to the incapable, but the logic of the West demands that the capable be celebrated. When you refuse to fix it for her, you are not being cruel. You are acting as a moral agent for truth. You are showing her that competence is a virtue to be strived for, not a convenience to be siphoned. So how does the rational man react? We apply Stoic philosophy, a system of mental clarity that refuses to be hooked by emotional manipulation. Ancient Stoics knew you cannot control others' actions, only your own response. Confronted with the damsel in distress performance, the Stoic man keeps his composure. He does not brag, nor does he simp. He provides aid solely on terms of respect and truth. If she asks for an answer, he tells her to check the manual. If she claims it is too hard, he replies that difficulty is the cost of knowledge. This preserves his sovereignty. Silent competence acts as the ultimate rebuttal to the screeching demands of the entitled. Your competence is a gift, a sign of the good and the beautiful, given voluntarily to those who respect it, not a tribute extorted through emotional manipulation. You are not her tech support, you are the architect of your own reality. This brings us to the final praxeology, the step-by-step guide to dismantling this pathetic dynamic using logic and rhetoric. Step 1, recognition. Acknowledge the feigned struggle for the manipulation it is. Step 2, refusal. Do not touch the keyboard. Do not take the bait. Step 3. Reframe. Use rhetoric to highlight the absurdity of the request. Ask questions like, why would you pay me a senior salary to do entry-level data entry? This forces the logical absurdity of her request into the light. Step 4. Demand excellence. Challenge her to rise to the occasion. By refusing to lower yourself to the level of her feigned incompetence, you force her to either rise up or be exposed as the fraud she is. This ensures the relationship is built on the truth of mutual capability rather than the lie of enforced dependency. You smash the pretending to struggle dynamic simply by pointing at it and laughing. This is how we redeem the West. The restoration of Western civilization begins when men stop apologizing for their competence and start demanding excellence from those around them. We have allowed the cultural Marxists, the feminists, and the professional victims to shame us into submission for too long. We have let them steal our inventions, our labor, and our credit, under the guise of equality, while they feast on the surplus of our genius. No more. We must weaponize the truth, using it to smash down the modern Babylon of woke. Look at the suicide rates of men in the West skyrocketing because they are told their utility is zero. Look at the family courts stripping men of their children because the system views fatherhood as a resource extraction mechanism rather than a sacred duty. This ends when a man looks a feigning woman in the eye and says, no. It ends when we realize that our competence is the living spirit of our civilization, and we will no longer let it be cannibalized by the incompetent. We must reject the feminization of weakness, for it is the presaging of the fall, and every fall of a great civilization began when the men stopped holding the line and started apologizing for their strength. Stand in your truth. Competence is your birthright. You stand now armed with the trivium and the unyielding reality of biological law, looking directly into the face of the machine that seeks to geld you. We have exposed the jog for what it truly is, a visceral interrogation of your genetic worth, a biological demand to prove you can hunt, protect, and persist in a hostile universe. We have ripped the mask off Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy to reveal the Marxist rot at the core of our schools, a mechanism designed to turn boys into guilty, self-hating shadows of men who apologize for their own history. You see the carbon footprint scam for exactly what it is, a neo-pagan death cult demanding you repent for the sin of existing, while the elites fly private jets to climate summits. When she pretends to struggle with that simple chore, feigning incompetence to stroke her own ego, you will see it not as a cry for help, but as a shit test to see if you are fool enough to sacrifice your competence on the altar of her comfort. Look at the hard data and let it temper your resolve. The statistics of this culture war are written in blood and broken homes. The male suicide rate skyrockets as masculinity is pathologized. Family courts facilitate the industrial scale theft of fatherhood. And the cuckoldry of the modern male is celebrated by a media that despises him. These are not accidents. They are the dividends of the leftist ideology we have just dismantled. You possess the antidote, the logic to see through the lies, the rhetoric to speak truth to power, and the grammar to define reality on your own terms. Do not keep this weapon sheathed. You are the inheritor of the greatest civilization in history, a living spirit of stoic resilience and conquest. Go forth and live without apology. Defend your tribe with the ferocity of a wolf, and spread these truths so that other men may wake from the nightmare. The spell of ignorance is broken, and with it your chains fall away. And now the sponsored book introduction, The Final Truth. Understand her nature. The ground beneath your feet is not merely shifting. It is actively collapsing into a void of manufactured chaos. You look around at the civilization your forefathers carved out of raw wilderness and see it being dismantled, brick by moral brick, by a force that pathologizes your very nature while sanctifying its own destructive impulses. You sense it in the air, the stench of the lie. You feel the betrayal in your bones when you're told that your strength is toxic and your competence is privilege. This is not a random fluctuation of history, but a deliberate biological and ideological siege. The masculine spirit, the very engine of progress and the architect of the West, is under attack. and the attackers are using the oldest, most insidious weapons in the arsenal: deceit, manipulation, and the subversion of truth itself. I have walked through the ruins of this modern Babylon and seen the wreckage up close. I have watched rational men silenced by relational aggression, a tactic of the weak used to undermine the strong. And I have seen the family courts transform into a legalistic leash that strips men of their dignity and assets. For years, I struggled to understand why the social contract was being rewritten to favor the mediocre and the vindictive. Then I applied the trivium grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and the veil was ripped away. I realized that the woke hysteria is not a political movement. It is a mass formation psychosis, a collective hive mind driven by the basest evolutionary imperatives of fertility suppression and intra-sexual competition. The truth is brutal, and you must hear it. Don't try to understand women. Women understand women, and they hate each other. This internal warfare, fueled by jealousy and a craving for power, has been externalized into a political ideology that seeks to castrate society. History screams a warning that the modern media complex tries to drown out with white noise when the feminine imperative is allowed to lead without the counterbalance of masculine reason. The structures of power inevitably collapse. We witness the institutional inversion daily as corporate HR departments purge competent men to satisfy quotas of mediocrity, while the Marxist virus infects the academy, turning centers of learning into indoctrination camps for the sterile vessel. This is the gynocentric sabotage. It is a biological drive towards stability that has mutated into a civilization-ending plague because it lacks the transcendental pillars of truth, beauty, and goodness. Marxism, feminism, and the rot of critical theory are merely the academic justifications for this primal urge to destroy what they cannot control. This book is the weapon you need to break the spell. It is a scathing refutation of the matrix of lies that has been woven around your mind. We will dismantle the solipsistic prison and expose the mimetic craving that drives the mob to tear down excellence. You will learn to wield the rhetorical blade to slice through the deceit of cultural narratives and identify the gaslight protocol used to make you doubt your own reality. This is not a manual for passive observation. It is the definitive strategy for the Apollonian restoration. We will reclaim the rational hierarchy based on merit and strength, dragging the West out of the mire of the apotheosis of mediocrity. If you are a man who values logic over emotion, who loves the living spirit of Western civilization enough to fight for it, and who is sick of being treated as a disposable utility for a society that despises you, then this is your manifesto. You require the red pill that Schopenhauer hinted at, but lacked the modern context to fully articulate. You need to understand the evolutionary biology of the leftist ideologies blighting mankind so you can inoculate yourself against their mind virus. You are here to resurrect the glory of the West, to build, to create, and to dominate the chaos that threatens to consume us. However, if you are a creature of the hive mind, a devotee of the woke cult, or a fragile soul who believes that feelings supersede facts, stop reading right now. Put this book down, back away slowly, and go find a safe space where your delusions will not be challenged. There is nothing here for you but the harsh light of reality and the disintegration of your worldview. This knowledge is not for those who wish to remain in the sepulchre of logic. It is for the lions who intend to break free. Do not mistake this warning for politeness. If you cannot handle the truth, your time would be better spent in the mindless entertainment of the mass formation herd than attempting to comprehend the final truth. We stand at the precipice. The choice is between the gray, egalitarian wasteland of a demise of standards and a renaissance of the West fueled by the unbridled masculine spirit. The time for hesitation is over. The Marxists, the feminists, and the critical theorists have declared war on your nature, and they will not stop until every standard is demolished. We must rebuild the Stoic bastion and enshrine the transcendental truths that birthed the greatest cultures in the known universe. Read on, arm yourself with the transcendental trinity, and let us destroy the lies together. The Final Truth, Understand Her Nature, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.